Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our latest People Hour webinar. Our topic for today is understanding the Apprenticeship Levy. And again, I can see from the number of delegates that we've had signing up to this webinar that it's clearly a hot topic that's in the minds of a lot of you at the moment. So my name's Simon Horsfield. I'm going to be hosting today. I'm one of the partners in the Employment, Pensions and Tax team at gunnercooke. I've developed a particular interest in the Apprenticeship Levy, principally because a number of my clients have been approaching me and asking me what it all means and what they should be doing. And obviously from an employment law perspective, there are particular nuances that we have to be mindful of when dealing with apprentices. But I'm delighted today to be joined by David Mcintyre from gunnercooke Consulting and Phil H Cox from First for Skills. And I will just introduce you to those two guests now. And I'll start with you, David, if you want to just say hello and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Simon. Hi, everyone. So David Mcintyre from gunnercooke Consulting, and I specialise in finance, business growth and change management. But I also have a background in leadership in training and skills. So I've been following the introduction of the levy with some interest and helping gunnercooke clients to prepare for its implementation. Great.
Thanks, David. Good to have you with us today. And Phil, same to you.
Hi everyone. My name's Phil H Cox. I'm a director at First for Skills. We are a national provider of apprenticeships, which means that we are the delivery organisation of apprenticeships across the country, working primarily with large multi-site, multi-sector organisations, mainly within the professional and service sectors, to design and deliver apprenticeships right across the country.
Great. And what's your role there, Phil?
So my role is working primarily with organisations to help them plan, prepare, review the levy, make sure that the programmes that they create and implement within their organisation deliver against their strategic objectives, but also achieve their kind of operational objectives in terms of making sure that the programmes, the apprenticeships themselves, are aligned to their business and aligned to the different roles that they have across their workforce.
Great, good, and we're delighted to have you with us as well, so thank you for that.
Nice to be here.
So just very quickly in terms of housekeeping, those who are regular attenders at these webinars will know that there is a questions facility on your dashboard. So by all means, if you have any questions as we're going along, please raise your virtual hand. We'll look out for those questions coming in. We'll pause the presentation, try and deal with the questions as best we can, and then move on. The other point to note is that, as usual, we are recording this webinar, so the webinar will be available for listening again via the gunnercooke and gunnercooke Consulting websites. So if any of your colleagues have missed this, or any of your peers who you think would benefit from hearing it, by all means do share the link with them afterwards. Thank you. So in terms of our agenda today, the four broad headings that we want to have a discussion around. Firstly, we want to look at what is the Apprenticeship Levy? Why is it being introduced? What's it designed to achieve? We then want to move on to think a little bit more strategically about how employers can plan for the introduction of the levy. And thirdly, how employers can ensure they get the most out of their levy investment. And then we'll conclude by just thinking about some of the employment law implications around taking on apprentices. So we will start with what is the Apprenticeship Levy and why is it being introduced? And David, I'm going to open up that one to you. If you could just start by explaining what is this levy?
Sure. So it's a new levy that's being introduced in the next tax year. So 6th of April onwards in terms of liability for the levy, May onwards in terms of the use of the levy for apprentices. The government first announced it at the back end of 2015. They've been releasing further information about it in dribs and drabs ever since, and now we know a fair amount about its implementation in April and May. Essentially, it's a payroll tax of 0.5% on your pay bill. There'll be a £15,000 annual allowance, which means that if you're an employer who has a pay bill of less than £3 million a year, then you effectively won't pay anything into the levy. For those that have a pay bill above £3 million a year, you will pay that excess amount into the levy as a payroll tax. And the amount that you pay in tax will be credited into a digital voucher account, which will be topped up by the government by 10% and then can be used to pay approved training providers to deliver apprenticeships within your business.
Okay, and who is it that collects that levy? Who's responsible for that?
So that runs through the PAYE system, as with other payroll taxes.
Great. And so basically small employers aren't going to be hit by any levy implications. Do we have a feel for what size of organisation might well be caught? I know it's a bit difficult to say, but...
Yeah, so anything over a £3 million pay bill, so depending on the amounts that you pay your workforce, it can typically 100 employees upwards.
Yeah. And if you've got a large number of employees, if you're a multi-site organisation with many thousands of employees, then this levy could be potentially quite a significant number. Phil, have you come across some big numbers?
Yeah, we work with a number of, I guess, PLC organisations where they employ tens of thousands of people, kind of frontline to kind of senior level, and their levies can be, in significant amount of money, so £2, £3, £4 million, kind of levy investment, which is significant. And I suppose a lot of organisations are now kind of saying, well, how do we maximise the value, the return that we get from that investment? And I think that goes across all sizes, whether you're a large PLC or a smaller organisation. It's still maximising the value you get from your investment in the apprenticeship programme.
Yeah, and we've said it's coming in from the 6th of April. What do you think about the awareness generally out there in the marketplace, Phil?
It's very interesting. I think that there's been a real kind of interesting kind of response to it. I think some organisations have kind of adapted to it very early. We're very involved in a lot of the kind of policy updates that were kind of coming out over the course of last year, and have really kind of got behind formulating plans around their apprenticeship programme, what they want to do, what that looks like, where they want to offer the scheme within their organisation. However, I think it's fair to say there's a large majority that aren't in that space yet and have probably been working through what it is they want to do, looking at the strategy. Is it around bringing new people into the organisation, or is it about upskilling existing colleagues within the workplace? So I think there's kind of various different levels of kind of readiness for the levy, and I think it's fair to say that there's a large number of organisations that are still kind of formulating their plans, still looking at what the options are and how they want to maximise their value from the apprenticeship scheme.
Great. Okay, thanks, Phil. So obviously apprentices aren't new, they're not a new concept, and people always say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but what is it that's caused the government to look at introducing the levy, to shake things up in this way, David?
Yeah, so the government has a target of creating 3 million new apprenticeships by 2020, so this is just one of a raft of measures that they're using to try and incentivise employers to take on apprenticeships. So last year there was the dropping of national insurance for under 24-year-old apprentices, which has helped to encourage. There's a real shift in public policy with the skills plan that was announced last year, and the accelerated process by which universities and others can get involved in higher level apprenticeships. So the idea is to create vocational pathways that go right through to degree and post-degree level that are of equal standing to the academic route. But what the government is in effect doing with the apprenticeship levy is it's incentivising businesses to take on apprentices because effectively they'll see the value in it, and that they lose the vouchers if they don't spend them within 24 months. But of course, it also provides a mechanism by which the increase in apprenticeships can be funded. So it's a win-win for the government.
Okay, and probably worth just clarifying at this point, you don't have to go down the apprenticeship route. If you're caught by the levy, it's not mandatory, is it?
No, absolutely not. And some employers are simply taking the view that they're not going to change their behaviour, and they'll simply take it as a payroll tax of the 0.5%, pay the 0.5%, and not take apprentices on, or to any greater degree than they would in the past. Now, in most cases that's a missed opportunity, but that's the business decision that some companies are taking.
And you've seen that, have you?
Yeah, very much so. I think there are some organisations, and quite often for those that aren't going to get any value from their investment, it's more in those cases around the alignment of the job roles, because there will be some organisations where the skill set or the level of the people might not, in some cases, kind of align itself to an apprenticeship qualification. I mean, the qualifications do go up to level 7, so very kind of advanced level of degree, but all the same, there are some organisations that are seeing it as a tax and don't wish to increase or introduce apprenticeships into their business for whatever reason. I think it's fair to say that that's the latter. We're finding that more organisations generally out there in the market are wanting to do something with the apprenticeship initiative, whether it's upskilling existing staff members, whether it's aligning it to their existing in-house management training, or whether it's a vehicle to bring new people into new roles within their organisation. So there's a real mixed kind of response to whether they spend or don't spend.
Yeah. And it's not just now something that's really centred around, say, manufacturing or engineering, those traditional industries that we've known have had apprentices. It goes much wider.
It does, and I think it's an interesting question, because I think the word apprenticeship is very well known, recognised and regarded in so many sectors. In other sectors, newer sectors, apprenticeships are newer and still within their kind of infancy, and still people will see them or perceive them in a certain way. But there are hundreds of different types of apprenticeships available now in pretty much every sector area out there, from an entry-level person that's coming into quite a junior level role right up to kind of senior management. So I think this kind of move is making more organisations see that apprenticeships can fit within their business, and they can apply to so many different roles at so many different levels.
Yeah, I know from a personal perspective, I'm thrilled to see the apprenticeship route operating within the legal sector, because traditionally that's been reserved for those who've gone through the traditional academic route. They've got their degree and gone to law school and so on.
Absolutely.
But now we're opening it up. It's great.
Which is great, and I think there's still a perception out there that an apprenticeship is just for a 16 to 18-year-old school leaver. And yes, it is, but absolutely, it can be something that can support senior management in very different specialist roles across so many different sector areas. And I think that's now becoming more commonly recognised and commonly known, but still there does tend to be a bit of a perception that it only fits a certain type of person of a certain age, but that's certainly changing.
So go on, what constitutes an apprenticeship, Phil?
So the best way to describe an apprenticeship is it's a vocational work-based qualification. And again, the way that it's delivered does tend to vary by industry sector, but it's a work-based qualification where you're gaining on the job and off the job skills, knowledge and competencies that are very much aligned to the job that each apprentice will be doing in a work context. As I say, they vary from kind of entry-level jobs, which is classified as a level 2 apprenticeship, which is equivalent to a GCSE level, GCSEs, right up to kind of level 7. So they do span, I guess, from the kind of entry right up to senior management, and across various different kind of sectors. And I suppose, they can be utilised in so many different ways. So, apprenticeship it is a job. Apprenticeship can be, as I say, a vehicle to bring some new people, some new talent into the organisation. An apprenticeship can be, 1 year up to 3-4 years, again, depending on the sector area. But we're kind of finding with the levy that, not just the levy, but it probably has stimulated more demand, that we're seeing a lot more employers of all different sizes, all different sectors, looking at apprenticeships being a great way to develop their management and actually aligning the apprenticeship qualification with their in-house management schemes, so they can get some value and some return from their management programs, but actually enhance what they already do, because it's a nationally recognised qualification that to a certain extent can support someone's skills as they develop and grow within the sector or the organisation they work with. But yes, it's very much a kind of vocational qualification, so you're earning while you're learning, I suppose.
Yeah, that's good. And First for Skills obviously been delivering apprenticeship for years. How in your mind does the levy system differ from what we've had previously?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily change the apprenticeship or the apprenticeship experience. It's probably more around the technical elements of how things have been funded. So historically, and up until the levy comes into play in April, May time, ordinarily delivery has been through an accredited training provider who has funded contracts with government to deliver the apprenticeship training. And that's primarily how it's worked. So the funding has generally been kind of aligned to the age demographic of an apprentice. So almost like 16 to 18 have always been fully funded, and then employers would pay a contribution to more mature learners, if you like. But I suppose now the differences are that the employers themselves are investing or will be paying through the tax for the apprenticeship scheme. The bandings, so there's 12 funding bands that have been brought in that are aligned to the different, a number of different qualifications. The major difference from the current funding world to the new levy funding world is that the levy funding is open to all age bands, whereas at the moment only 16 to 18 is fully funded, and if you're 24 plus, in some cases in Scotland you're not funded, and in England an employer would have to pay a contribution. So there's more flexibility to use an apprenticeship to support your wider workforce, irrespective of the demographic or of the age. So it's a positive thing in terms of trying to be able to support more of the workforce against the current kind of system of a training provider holding the kind of funding and only being able to utilise it on certain age demographics.
And the government still has some skin in the game, don't they, in terms of their top up? So whatever your levy is, your digital vouchers, there's then a government top up as well.
There is, yes. So there'll be a 10% top up that will be a contribution by government to support the levy. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And it's not quite use it or lose it, is it? Because the digital vouchers stay live and redeemable for more than just that current tax year?
It's 24 months is the period. So yeah, you can use it over a 24-month period. So it's not something on the, in April, in May, you have to start straight away. It's around, developing the plans, making sure you've got a strategy, and then you utilising it within that 24-month period.
And what about if you want to introduce a plan that goes beyond the value of your levy? David, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so the way that it operates for those either that don't pay the levy because they fall under the 3 million, or alternatively for those who pay the levy but have gone beyond their voucher balance, there's a co-financing scheme being put in place which is similar to the old system. So you would procure the training from your chosen provider, and you would pay 10% of that, which you would pay to the provider rather than through the digital voucher system, and the provider would draw down the other 90% of government funding for the support of that apprentice. So effectively you're paying 10% of the training cost.
Okay, so there's a big incentive there to invest in these apprentices. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's move on to think about levy readiness. Go on, Phil, killer question for you. Are people ready for the levy?
Very, very key question. I think that there are some organisations, there are a lot of organisations that probably are or getting very close to. A lot of organisations are still kind of formulating their plans. I think what we've found, certainly there's been a broader, input from different stakeholders within different employers around the levy. So, involvement from finance, involvement from payroll, and involvement from HR to kind of look at what is the strategy, how they're going to spend the levy. But I think a lot of organisations have already worked out what their levy tax is going to be. I think quite often the next stage is to look at how then you're going to spend that money and where you see, where employers see the apprenticeship adding the most value to the organisation. So we're finding a lot of businesses are at that stage in terms of looking at where the apprenticeship would best fit, where it aligns with their strategy and where their business is going. So we're kind of finding a lot of businesses where they have more demand within their organisation, in some cases, than what their levy tax is. So we work with a number of fast-growing businesses that actually they want more apprentices in their business than what their levy is. And we have other organisations that have significant levy spends, and actually they're trying to broaden their apprenticeship offer across the workforce. So whereas they might have just offered apprenticeships within, let's say, the finance area or the IT area of their business, they're looking more broadly at potentially warehouse, logistics, call centres, and actually broadening their apprenticeship offer to make it more available to their workforce. Many others have been looking at the structure of their apprenticeship schemes. Where do they want to bring it into their business? So is it about bringing new talent in? Is it about upskilling existing staff? Or is it actually a developmental programme for select colleagues within the business that is almost an aspirational development growth programme? So we found that a lot of businesses now know what the tax is, how much it's going to be. It's now how they actually turn that into an apprenticeship model and where that sits within their business.
And David, is the training sector ready for this? I mean, I read somewhere that the training market itself is going to be worth something like 9 billion as a result of the introduction of the levy. Is there that capacity within the market to deliver that many apprentices?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a real challenge. I saw some early analysis on it which suggested that the size of the sector would double as a result of the levy if everybody took up the use of the vouchers from the start. Given that it was announced in 2015, training providers are gearing up, and there are a number of new training providers that are springing up to try and take advantage of the introduction of the levy. So I think there's a good understanding of it, and I think the proof will come in May in terms of the market demand and what actually happens. But it might be that it's quite competitive. We'll have to see what that does in terms of negotiated prices, but also in terms of the availability for training for those who want to use the vouchers early.
Yeah, okay. And from those who we've been dealing with who are partway along that journey of getting ready for the levy coming in, I think we've touched on this already, that some of them are just saying, fine, we'll just treat it as a tax and take that hit and not do anything about it. Others are looking at maybe optimising the use of the vouchers through adjusting recruitment and training approach. Are there any other things that people are considering?
Well, as we said earlier, people are at different stages of preparedness. So some organisations have not given the levy any consideration yet. So the first thing is, if you're one of those, don't panic. And actually, there are a number of employers who have thought, well, it's a 2017 introduction, so we'll leave it to 2017 to consider it, and actually the vouchers will last for some time, so therefore we've still got time to work it through. In terms of the different options, as you get into it, clearly you need to the training needs to be an approved apprenticeship standard delivered by an approved provider. So that could be an external approved provider, a training organisation, or a college, or there is some larger companies have their own in-house training companies. So that's an option for people to set up an in-house training company, possibly with the support of an external training provider as well. And there's some provision for what is known as employer training companies, which actually in effect allow the companies themselves to deliver some of the training in partnership with a registered training provider. And there's a little bit less in terms of regulation and inspection and so on the employer as a result of that than there would if they had their own training company and they were subject to skills funding agency, scrutiny, Ofsted inspection, and all the things that come with being a training company.
You've come across that, have you?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of organisations that are kind of saying, well, actually, we deliver our own in-house training. We deliver it very well. We've got very experienced, knowledgeable people that are delivering their own L&D on a day-to-day basis. Are there smarter ways to co-deliver the apprenticeship? So aligning in-house training with the apprenticeship standards. So elements of it can be delivered still internally, whilst an approved training provider can support with some of the assessment and some of the teaching and the learning. So we are finding a lot of organisations looking at almost like a collaborative, co-delivered type approach. And as David said as well, there are other organisations that are probably more established with apprenticeships where they've developed a good level of knowledge, they've built good infrastructure internally around apprenticeships, and they will look over a period of time to deliver wholly internally. But there does often tend to be a level of experience you need to do that, given that you are kind of exposed to things like Ofsted and various different policy and regulations that the Skills Funding Agency are responsible for. But I think certainly management is the area we've seen so many different employers kind of saying, actually, we can get some value from our in-house programs by linking it to the apprenticeship scheme. So it supports their training budget, but at the same time, it maximises the investment of the levy without fundamentally changing anything radical with their in-house training. So there are all sorts of different options, and I suppose a lot of it comes down to the design of the curriculum, the programme against in-house and the standards of the apprenticeship, and making sure it has got the best fit within your organisation to deliver whatever the strategy is.
Okay, good. I'm just going to pause for a couple of questions at this point. Not sure who's going to be the best person to answer this one, but there's a couple of themes emerging here. Can the digital vouchers be used for existing staff who are employed prior to the levy coming into force, or are they only for new apprentices?
They can be used for the existing workforce. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really helpful, isn't it? We can maximise the value by looking at our existing workforce, not just new recruits. And then related question, what if you've got some apprentices already partway through their apprenticeship? They might have completed the first year. Can you then flip and use the vouchers for the second and third year of their training?
You can. So any apprentices that you may have that are on the programme at this moment in time, so pre the levy being introduced in April, May time, they will be fully funded by government until the point that they complete their current apprenticeship programme. From there, if they wish to progress or go on to a further apprenticeship programme as part of their development, that would come against the levy. That would be offset against their levy tax.
But the levy vouchers don't get used against the current apprenticeship delivery.
Okay. And then there's a question around reclaiming training costs generally for existing employees who aren't apprentices. And I'm assuming that that's not going to be possible unless what we're talking about is somebody who's under an approved apprenticeship training program.
Yeah. One of the ways I'm finding that businesses are considering getting real value out of the digital vouchers is by looking at how they can redesign internal training such that it actually uses the vouchers rather than costing them separately. So it might be that for your leadership and development training, you can group some of it together and use an approved apprenticeship standard to deliver the training that you need, rather than do it piecemeal and at cost yourselves.
Okay, so there's a real opportunity to create some value there. Excellent. Okay, so David, you tell me if there's anyone out there listening to the webinar who was in that camp that Phil mentioned, who maybe put it off to a 2017 problem and haven't started preparing. Where do you start? What's the way to go about this?
Yeah, I think that the first thing to do is to understand the implications of the levy and understand the exposure that you have as a business. So what is it going to cost you in payroll terms? And then you can start to think about, well, what does that give me in my digital account, and how can I actually use that to realise some value in the business, either by, as I say, redesigning existing training and saving cost, or by adding value to the workforce by using vouchers that would otherwise not be used, and introducing apprenticeship training. And then effectively you can come up with an options appraisal and consider your strategy for dealing with it on an ongoing basis. Now, at gunnercooke Consulting, we have a sort of formal 4-stage process which takes organisations through informing and assessing, skills design, strategy implementation, and then framework for future delivery. So we can support our clients by effectively taking it off their hands and dealing with it for them. Although a lot of clients are looking to, in order to make sure they fully understand it themselves, do the legwork themselves, but just need that extra support of some expertise and somebody to take them through the process. So we've been doing that with a number of clients too.
Yeah. Okay. And I think we might have touched on this already. I don't know whether there's anything else you wanted to add to this, David, around whether all businesses lend themselves to apprenticeship training, or whether it's better targeted at certain sectors.
Yeah, I think most businesses. I think a lot of businesses, and some of the businesses that have said, well, we're going to ignore it and just treat it as a tax. That is simply through a lack of understanding that there is a real breadth when it comes to apprenticeships. There's a huge number more apprenticeships in development now for businesses that are looking to respond to the introduction of the levy. And even if there isn't one that's suitable for you, that's approved or in development, you could always get together with others within your sector to create a new apprenticeship standard that meets your needs. So, there are very few businesses to which apprenticeship training wouldn't apply. And as Phil mentioned earlier, that's at all levels. So from entry level right through to, I think the highest currently approved apprenticeship standard is master's level. But actually there's provision for postgrad level as well. And I'm sure we'll see those in due course.
Okay, just again pausing for a couple more questions that have come out of this. So if we use the apprenticeship levy for existing staff, do we need to sign them up to a learning agreement? And if so, does this change their employment terms and conditions?
That sounds like a question for you, Simon, but yes.
Yes to both. Learning agreement, what's a learning agreement? Do you understand it? Is that?
So a learning agreement is ordinarily something that forms part of their contract of employment. So it's an addendum almost that will stipulate that they are an apprentice, they are going through a period of learning, and just some of kind of the safeguarding, some of the kind of standard requirements that allows access and support for those particular learners. So it doesn't necessarily change the employment contract, it's just an additional element that is a learning agreement that forms part of that protects them during that period of time that they're in or going through the apprenticeship programme.
Okay. And we'll come back to terms and conditions of employment as one of the topics at the end of the webinar programme. Let's have a look. We've got another question here. For an employee trained to a level 1 in a particular area, can we put them on a level 2 and use the digital vouchers even though they are not an apprentice or on an apprenticeship programme?
They would need to be on an apprenticeship programme to be part of the digital service. So the whole kind of levy is very much around they would need to be an apprentice, whether it's level 1, level 2, level 3 or beyond. So it has to be an approved, accredited apprenticeship programme that they're on to be able to utilise the digital vouchers.
Okay. And if you are a small company with a payroll of less than 3 million, do you actually get any vouchers?
You don't, although over time, the latest release of information from the government suggests that people will be expected to sign up to an online account. So I expect that as we get towards 2020, we'll see a situation where everybody has a digital account and actually all apprenticeship training is bought through that digital account. But that, as I say, that's not the situation at the moment.
Okay, good. So let's move on to think about getting maximum value from levy investment. What are you tending to see, David, in terms of what employers are doing to add value through the levy?
Yeah, so I think people are finding real value where they're able to redesign their workforce strategy such that their levy contributions, which would otherwise be a sunk cost, are going towards activity that is either undertaken at the moment and therefore saves cost, or alternatively adds value to the business in a way that they haven't previously seen because they haven't considered the use of apprenticeships in the past.
Yeah, so I suppose that could be looking at new recruitment, for example, and using the apprenticeship model to attract new talent into the organisation, or it could be offering new programs to your existing staff that maybe set you apart from your competitors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one area where we've seen a lot of planning, a lot of consideration is around those industries that are looking at new route ways into employment. So it might be we've been dealing with a number of professional services firms where the typical route into employment is graduate schemes, and their workforce is well paid, well educated. So they're considering all the things around leadership and development and existing workforce and so on. But they're also thinking about, well, what happens if we don't take on graduates? What happens if we take on school leavers ourselves, train them ourselves in partnership with a university through a program such that they get a degree, they get the apprenticeship, we get talent at an early stage, and we can become more competitive and get better trained staff as a result. And it's becoming more and more attractive to the apprentices because, of course, it puts them directly into paid employment. It gives them employment experience. It still gives them a degree, but it also avoids them getting in that student debt, which is a real concern for people now.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the ones I'd heard about that I thought was very appealing we've talked about senior managers and the level 7 stuff, putting your senior managers through an apprenticeship MBA, for example, is perfectly feasible, isn't it? Which could be a very attractive proposition in terms of your retention strategy to make sure you keep hold of employees.
I think that's also a big part of your attraction strategy. So I suppose a lot of organisations are, whether looking at the kind of level 7 or level 6, it's actually by showing that they're investing in their entire workforce and there are opportunities to develop into senior leadership or into management roles. Actually, that's a great story to tell from an attraction perspective when you're bringing new people into new business, so they can really climb the ladder, really develop within that organisation. And you're an organisation that's really invested in its workforce. So I think it's an attractive offer to be able to come into a business and see that you can develop through the apprenticeship scheme right up to high levels.
That's good. I think we've had some more questions. So, here we go. A technical question here around when will registration for digital accounts open?
Well, originally we thought it would be January. That was
so that'll be tomorrow then.
That was announced last year. But the latest release of information from the government last Monday said that they were piloting it with a few employers, and that actually they expected people to it to be opened up for everyone to register sometime in February.
Okay.
So watch this space.
Yeah, fine. And as soon as we hear anything, we'll send an update out to people just to let them know that that's now available. Phil, we've been talking about how you can create value, and I know that's the kind of stuff that we were talking about, that HR professionals and L&D experts love, the idea of how you use it to retain and attract best talent. But the other stakeholder in all of this is going to be the finance director, who's going to say, show me the return on the investment, Phil.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Yes, return on investment is a hot topic. I think, obviously this is the first time this has been introduced across, all sectors. And as you would expect, obviously finance directors and exec board members are all very much keen to make sure that it's implemented in the right way, but actually there's some value that's been gained back from the investment. So it's very easy to kind of work out what your investment is, obviously through the tax that you're paying. It's about then looking at how you, within your own organisation, will utilise the apprenticeship to gain some value. And I suppose different organisations are responding to it in very different ways. So some are very much looking for a bottom line impact. So, if they're spending $500,000 or $1 million or 50,000, whatever it may be, actually what value is coming back into the business. And that can be through a number of different ways. So some are looking at recruitment, so support bringing in new talent that potentially might be on a slightly lesser salary than a direct hire in some cases. Others are looking at increased retention, so using the apprenticeship to retain, grow and develop people for the longer term, so they stay in the business longer, they achieve more, they kind of climb the ranks within the organisation. Others have been looking at probably some softer elements of return on investment, so particularly within the kind of service sectors? Is there an uplift or an increase on customer experience, on productivity, even things like absenteeism? So what is the difference of an apprentice versus an unapprentice, and how is that measured? So many different organisations are looking at different metrics in terms of the value that they gain from the apprentice or the apprenticeship. I suppose the primary one is where you're offsetting any potential training budget, existing training budget against the apprenticeship, so particularly within management is an obvious area. So there are a number of different ways to do it. I suppose it's each organisation looking at what is their business driver and where does the apprenticeship best fit within their business, and then actually what is the impact of that. So is it retention, is it development, or is it just investing in the workforce? So you're kind of developing a sustainable, skilled, long-term workforce who have the right set of skills to do what they need to do. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. It's just looking at what your organisation sees as being the value of the training that you're investing in.
And obviously you've been involved in some pretty big programs for some very large employers. Yeah. Have you seen any success stories? I know this is pre-levy stuff, yes. But any success stories you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, some good examples. We've got one particular large retail organisation that we're working with where they're growing very, very quickly. They need a lot of new talent coming into their business, and they've decided to use their levy or their apprenticeship levy as a vehicle to bring in young people, young talent into the business, but very much as a structured management program. So they're actually reducing the scale of their graduate intake and increasing their apprenticeship intake, mainly because they need the skills. They need people that aren't necessarily going to hit a glass ceiling in their context. They want someone that is prepared to roll the sleeves up and work hard from day one, but will gain the skills, develop the right behaviours and attitude in a work environment. Another employer that we're working with is seeing it very much around retention. So they found through the analysis of doing apprenticeships historically that apprentices stay longer within their business. They stay considerably longer. They're generally more productive in what they do. And they found that actually that's a fantastic vehicle for their business and their kind of workforce retention strategy. So they will be increasing the scale of their apprenticeship this year because it's proven that their apprentice population are doing better things. They've been more productive, they're better with customers, they're more reliable, they're more responsive. And culturally, that has a really positive impact as well. It's almost created a healthy competition within other workforce areas because the apprentices of 2017 or 2016 have come in and done a fantastic job, and actually it's raised the bar within their organisation. So there are lots of different metrics and lots of different organisations are measuring it in very different ways, but we're seeing some really positive, we're hearing some very positive stories out there in terms of how apprentices at whatever level, at whatever job role, are doing some really good things there. So yeah, it's varies from organisation to organisation.
Yeah, but it's really positive and encouraging.
It is, absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Another question just come in, obviously following on from what we were talking about in terms of MBA apprenticeships. Do we know any universities offering those, and which fields do they normally apply to?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a learning curve for universities as well, this new world, but universities are required to participate in, put it another way, any apprenticeship standard for a degree apprenticeship requires the participation of an HE institution. So there are universities already involved in the development and the delivery of the apprenticeship standards that are in place. So, for example, there's one that operates with the CMI, the Chartered Management Status, and delivers both a degree at the end of the programme, but also the CMI qualification for the apprentice. So, given what I said earlier about the skills plan that came out in 2015, and that was hot on the heels of the Wolf report into post-19 training, and this real shift in policy to creating technical and professional routeways that rival the academic routeway, and that tradition of everybody going to university and then ending up with and then fighting for a job that isn't necessarily relevant to the degree that they undertook. most universities now are looking at how they can apply degree apprenticeships in order to safeguard their recruitment numbers and be part of the New World Order.
Okay, very good. So we will move on just to think briefly about the employment law implications of taking on apprentices. I think the key point to note here is that apprentices, and I'm talking about new apprentices here, they are employees, so they benefit from all of the usual raft of employment rights, whether it's protection from discrimination, the right to the national minimum wage, and of course there is an apprenticeship minimum wage that applies during the first year of the apprenticeship. Yeah. Then they'll move on to either the adult rate or working time regulations, health and safety legislation applies in the normal way. The only point I would make there is if you're dealing with young workers, so under the age of 18, there's just enhanced levels that you need to bear in mind and special provisions there. The usual family-friendly policies will apply, as will the right to protection from unfair dismissal at the end of the apprenticeship, although you would normally have some other substantial reason defence to any unfair dismissal claim, but you just need to make sure you follow that fair procedure in the period leading up to the end of the fixed-term apprenticeship. Now, in terms of the employment contract itself, there are two types that we need to be mindful of. There is the contract of apprenticeship, and there is the approved English apprenticeship agreement. And it's important that you work out which one you want to be using, because there are very different consequences depending on which route you go down. And the contract of apprenticeship is the old route, and that's the default model, if you like, where training is the primary purpose of the contract that's been entered into. And for that reason, the usual ability that an employer has to bring that contract to an end doesn't apply. It's much more restricted in terms of your right to end the contract. So, for example, conduct dismissals are much more difficult to make the individual redundant unless there's a complete cessation of the business. And on termination, they will have enhanced termination rights, so damages for lost earnings, but also damages for lost training and lost future prospects. And my sense is that old regime was a big restriction in terms of employers' willingness to take on apprentices, because they knew they were this kind of protected species. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But of course, since the government's been planning the introduction of the levy, we've enjoyed or seen a bit of deregulation in this space, which has ended up with this approved English apprenticeship agreement. And there's pretty much a standard template that you can use to qualify as one of these agreements, though it has to tick certain boxes. So there are certain provisions that have to be included, and if you don't include them, you'll default to the old style of contract of apprenticeship. So it's very important you get it right, but once you do get it right, it gives you much more freedom, because it's a contract of service. So it's like any other contract of employment that you would have in the workplace. They are for a fixed term, but you can build in the right to terminate those apprenticeship agreements early without any of the enhanced termination rights. So essentially they give you just that bit more flexibility, I think, and a bit more incentive again to actually embrace these apprenticeships. Okay, question come in. Is it possible to get a template for the apprenticeship agreement? Yeah, I'm very happy to circulate an example agreement to anyone that's listening and contacts. I'll certainly make sure that the person who's asked that question, we forward one after this webinar. Phil, in your experience, does the training provider get involved in this kind of thing, or is it down to the the employer?
Ultimately, the ownership would sit with the employer to decide, the kind of having the apprenticeship agreement, what have you. But the training provider will support that, so we'll facilitate that. So agreeing something that works for both the employer and the provider, and then we will support the kind of process in terms of managing that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. And the key point to note: these deregulated apprenticeship agreements that I've been talking about can only be used where there is an approved apprenticeship standard in place. So anything that's dealt with through the levy will tick that box, because that would have to be, by definition, an approved apprenticeship standard. But if you're looking at non-approved apprenticeship training, then you couldn't use that deregulated apprenticeship agreement.
Could I just add something else? It doesn't necessarily relate to employment law, but I know it's something that a lot of organisations do ask around rate of pay, particularly for new apprentices. So, as you said, Simon, there is a minimum government rate for an apprentice, which I think is going to be around about £3.50. It's due to change very shortly. What often employers will do is kind of say, well, actually, is that the rate that we want to pay, or what is the right rate to pay an apprentice, and what is an attractive rate to pay to get the right type of talent into your business? And I suppose there's no right or wrong answer, but I'd certainly say from experience, it's around looking at your marketplace, the kind of, if you are looking at bringing in new apprentices, what kind of calibre of person do you want, and what is a suitable and representative rate of pay to offer them, so it is an attractive proposition that they will want to be and be motivated to work for, and will see it being part of a longer term career. So we find that some organisations don't necessarily reduce the rate of pay at all for an apprentice. They will pay their usual kind of direct hire rate. Others may reduce it slightly, because they'll recognise in the first year they are doing an element of learning, and they offset a cost, but they may introduce incremental increases against certain KPIs or performance metrics during the first year or second year of their apprenticeship programme. So I think it's around looking at the marketplace within your own respective sector, what is attractive to the audience, and how will you get the right type of person into your business. But there's no right or wrong as long as it's above the minimum. But you tend to find if it's a healthy rate of pay, you will get the right people into the organisation who will then obviously be able to work and want to work for the long term.
There's a big red flag there for me as the employment lawyer, just thinking about if it so happens that your apprentices are significantly younger than your non-apprentice direct hires doing the same kind of work, and you pay them a different rate, you just have to watch out for any discrimination angle there, age discrimination. But as Phil said, there are ways, I guess, that you can justify that slight difference in treatment, as long as you put in place those other measures, the incremental pay increases and so on.
Even for those employers who choose to pay their apprentices the same rate, there are still incentives for taking on young apprentices. So we've not talked about it so far in this webinar, but there's a £1,000 incentive for taking on a 16 to 18-year-old apprentice, which is paid by the government via the provider outside the digital voucher system. So effectively it's a cash payment of £1,000 per apprentice. And then of course there's the national insurance under 24 rate for apprentices, whereby you don't pay national insurance that I mentioned earlier. So that's an added incentive as well. And the government's also paying, it sits outside the digital voucher system, and it doesn't relate to the employer directly. The government's also, under a transitional arrangement, paying 20% extra to the training provider in order to train 16 to 18-year-old apprentices. But as I say, that doesn't use up the vouchers. That's simply an extra incentive for the provider and for employers to employ 16 to 18-year-old apprentices in particular. Okay,
and did you mention, sorry, I might have missed that, did you just mention the NIC?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then we've had another question come through about what we would recommend to help manage the situation where there's an existing employee undertaking an apprenticeship for development purposes, and they decide to leave the organisation 6 months into an apprenticeship. And I suppose that are we getting into the territory of recovering training costs and the extent to which that's permissible under the approved apprenticeship standards?
Yeah, and that would very much depend on the contract that is in place with that employee. In terms of how the employee takes on the apprenticeship after that point, if they go to another employer, there is provision for that for the individual.
And there's also, I suppose, if to answer that question from a financial implication perspective, so the way the funding will work, or the levy spend will work, is it's almost pro rata. So every apprentice will have a value, if you like, in terms of the cost of the training of the programme, and it's prorated over the duration of the programme. So let's say it's £5,000 for that particular sector area for that individual. That'll be split across a 12-month period if it's a 12-month programme, with an uplift for completion, so an increased amount. So if someone comes off halfway, you won't be paying the full cost, if that makes sense, for the whole duration. So if someone comes off for 6 months, you'll only be paying the equivalent of 6 months' worth of levy for that individual.
Yeah, and I would certainly always include a provision in the contract that enables you to recover a proportion of those training contracts. You just have to be careful that that's not a contractual penalty. So the usual rules apply, where you maybe have it on a sliding scale depending how far into the training programme they are. Good. Well, I'm conscious of time. There don't seem to be any more questions. Gents, any final top tips for people as we bring this to a close? What should we be doing now? What's the one takeaway message from you, David?
Yeah, I think the takeaway message is, if you're not already planning, then get planning, understand what the implication of the levy is and how much it's going to affect you, and if you need help, ask us for help.
Phil, anything to add?
I'd say along very similar lines. I think it's around looking at where, once you've done your planning, it's around looking at where the apprenticeship has the best fit with your workforce and the different roles you've got in the business, so you can get some value from it.
Good. Thank you, gents. And obviously, for those who are listening, any questions, please direct them through me after this webinar or your usual gunnercooke advisor. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll leave it there until the next time.